Caleb Williams' completion percentage and inaccuracies have been a contention point and a spot of criticism this season. So we're putting his throws under the microscope to figure out what's going into the passes that fall incomplete.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thanks for helping make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On the show today, I want to take a deep dive into Caleb Williams' completion percentage and some of the missed throws we've seen this year to get a sense of just how much is him missing open receivers versus receivers making mistakes, dropping passes, batted passes at the line of scrimmage, intentional throwaways, and also more specifically on the throws that he is missing with poor accuracy. What's actually happening on those plays? Like what's going wrong? I think there's some trends we can see so far this season in Caleb Williams' game, and we can kind of use that to kind of look at then where the Bears can, I don't know if fix it's the right word, but improve upon that and trend in the right direction, and kind of where this leaves the evaluation of Caleb Williams as a quarterback. But I thought we'll start at the broadest level and then kind of work our way down a little bit more granularly from there, because completion percentage is something that we've heard Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams himself talk about, through the offseason and through training camp, of them having like certain metrics or benchmarks that they would want him to get for. I remember they talked about shooting for like a 70% completion percentage. Well, only one quarterback in the NFL right now has a greater than 70% completion percentage, Drake May of the New England Patriots. Everybody else is under 70%. A bunch of guys right at 69 and, a few at 60, 68. Caleb Williams, over the course of the season is down at 59.2. He ranks 33rd out of 34 quarterbacks that qualify in completion percentage. League average for starters is 64.8. Caleb is at 59.2. The completion percentage is lower than it should be. It is too low. That doesn't mean Caleb Williams is a bad quarterback, but it's lower than you want it to be and lower than you should be. But as we know, completion percentage is not the same as accuracy percentage, because sometimes you are accurate on a throw that is not caught. Sometimes you are throwing a pass that you have no intention of being accurate, like when you spike the ball. That hurts your completion percentage, but it's not a bad throw. Or when you are flushed out of the pocket and you throw the ball away safely, you're not aiming for a receiver. You're not trying to be accurate. You are intentionally choosing to throw an incomplete pass on those plays, and it's not necessarily a reflection of an inaccurate throw by the quarterback. Same thing is true for, batted passes at the line of scrimmage. Like, it's not a measurement of how accurate you were going to place the ball for the receiver. It was disrupted before we got a chance to see what kind of accuracy there was on that play. And all of those things lower your completion percentage without necessarily reflecting the accuracy and quality of the throw from the quarterback. And this is true for Caleb Williams. It's true for every quarterback in the NFL, right? So when we talk about these things affecting Caleb, but that can't be in a vacuum and say, oh, well, actually, if you took all those things away from Caleb, he would be much higher, because you took all those things away from other quarterbacks, they would also be much higher. And fortunately, the folks over at PFF have a bunch of great metrics for measuring this exact thing that I think can help add a little bit more context to Caleb, but might not be the panacea you might think it could be. So, like, for example, Caleb Williams has thrown away roughly 5% of his pass attempts this season. 5% of his attempts have ended as throwaways. I looked at this as a rate because some passers have attempted more passes or fewer passes than others. So if you just look at like the total number of throwaways, Caleb Williams is seventh in throwaways with 18 total throwaways. But as a percentage of his passes, it's 5% of his passes, which ranks 12th. It's the 12th highest rate of throwaways. So it's not on the extreme high end, but slightly higher than average, but not that much higher than average. He's not throwing, like, throwaways don't account for a huge gap in his completion percentage, but it's not nothing either, but it's a small piece of the puzzle. And we can point to a number of dropped passes of Caleb Williams this season. He has had 19 of his throws dropped this year. That is the fifth most of any quarterback in the NFL. And it just so happens to be that's 8% of his passes have been dropped this season. And that is also the fifth most. So he is experiencing drops by receivers at a higher rate than a lot of other quarterbacks. If you're wondering, the four quarterbacks ahead of him are Trevor Lawrence, Bo Nix, Dak Prescott, and Joe Flacco have had a higher percentage of their passes dropped than Caleb Williams. So that's, again, it's only 8% of his passes. That's not a small number, but it's less than 1 in 10. So, I mean, it doesn't account for all of the incompletions and all of the low completion percentage, but it's a factor in there. You look at the batted passes for Caleb as well. He has had 12 passes batted this season. That's tied for the second most in the NFL. But as a percentage of his pass attempts, it's about 3% of his pass attempts have been batted. It's the fifth highest rate of batted passes. So you can start to kind of add together those percentages, right? 5% throwaways, 3% batted, 8% drops. That's about, 16% of his plays around there are throwaways, drops, and batted passes. And that can boost your completion percentage there. If you take away those sort of, 16%-ish of passes and you don't make those completions, but you just kind of take them away from being incompletions and take them away from hurting his completion percentage, right? You can start to build that number up a little bit higher. Again, if you wanted to be fair, you have to do that to every quarterback. And so it's not like you can just do it to him and not do that same bump. But PFF has a stat that's called adjusted completion percentage, where essentially they do just this. They take the completion percentage and then they subtract the throws that are drops by receivers, the throws that are batted passes, and the stuff that the spikes, all of the plays that are not quote unquote aimed passes downfield. And so it's the percentage of aimed passes thrown on target. So essentially they take completions plus drops divided by aimed pass attempts. So you count the drops as completions and then you remove the throwaways and the batted passes. And that would put Caleb at 70.9% essentially accuracy on his throws this season, which is a lot better than the 59% completion percentage, 59 to about 71%. But when you do that for every quarterback, Caleb Williams' adjusted completion percentage of 70.9% is still 34th in the NFL. It's about the same as his completion percentage in terms of rank. And so what that tells me is yes, he's being affected by drops, batted passes, and throwaways, but it's not the whole story. And he's not being affected by those a crazy amount more than anyone else. Certainly more than some quarterbacks, but not more than all. That doesn't explain away the low completion percentage. He is missing some throws. He is more inaccurate than he should be at times. And that doesn't make him a bad quarterback or a lost cause or someone who's having a bad season, but it does mean there's some room for improvement there. And so I want to take a deeper dive into those other missed throws, the ones that are not dropped, batted, thrown away, or spiked, but aimed passes downfield that Caleb Williams does not hit, and trying to find some of the trends in what's going wrong in some of those, and what to make of the missed plays that we have seen Caleb get. That's next on Locked On Bears.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
So a significant number of Caleb Williams' incomplete passes have been thrown downfield. And I should put the caveat on right away that doesn't always mean they're inaccurate. You know, he could throw an accurate pass and a defensive back can reach a hand in there and swat it away. And right, there's a difference between you can throw an accurate pass that's not always complete, that's also not dropped, right? There's some gray area here. And you could, I guess from there, you could make that, well, should he have thrown the pass if the defender was within reach to bat it away? And sometimes you're giving your receiver a shot at it, and it's an accurate catchable ball, but that the receiver doesn't end up catching, so it's not necessarily a bad throw per se, but right, so it's not so black and white of like these are the good incompletions and these are the bad incompletions. But I do want to focus specifically for a moment on those specific plays where you can point to inaccuracy specifically, not a DB making a diving pass breakup or, you know, a DB hitting the receiver so hard that it jars the ball loose or whatever it is, but like a play and the throws where it is either overthrown, it's too deep or too high for a receiver, it's underthrown, it's too short or too low for a receiver, it's in front of the receiver where it's the direction he's working towards horizontally and it's too far in front, or, you know, behind the receiver where, again, typically working horizontally and it's not like it's too high or too low, it's just too left or too right, depending on which direction the receiver is breaking towards. And when I go through Caleb Williams' throws this year, I see some trends in that, kind of based on where on the field he's throwing and what type of routes he's throwing in those areas. Like, you can look, first of all, at like Caleb Williams' passing chart for the season, where essentially, you know, True Media and some of the other analytics companies will just take and they'll just plot, you know, from the line of scrimmage, how far left and right and how far downfield every incompletion, completion, touchdown, interception was this season. And you can see just like, even visually, which doesn't work for the podcast listeners out there, but if you look at the charts visually, like you can see a lot of incompletions at the sideline outside of the numbers, particularly downfield. You know, the short sideline passes under 10 yards, pretty good accuracy there. But anything like 10 and beyond down the sidelines, you're seeing a lot of incomplete passes. And then you see a little bit more sprinkled, like deep middle of the field. And I think there's a little bit more nuance to that we'll talk about in a second here. But like, you could right away see like some different zones and areas. Like, he's got the deeper seams are fine. You get a little bit closer to the numbers, but like right around the hash marks is kind of where you get a little bit more of like the incomplete passes. And of course, some of these are drop passes and, you know, aren't all quick Caleb Williams' fault, but at least you can kind of get some like heat map visual of like, okay, there's some areas that stand out as a little bit less accurate and successful than others. But even more finer than that is like from a route standpoint, that I think there are specific routes in those specific areas of the field that he misses in specific ways. And it's great that, you know, our partners over at True Media track this, right? On every incomplete pass, they can list the primary reason. And sometimes there's more than one reason, right? He's under pressure and he's off balance and he overthrows him. But like, from as far as the delivery of the pass route, they can separate it by overthrown, underthrown, behind or in front, or a pass breakup or a miscommunication or a drop or those kind of things. And so, like, for example, the route that we've seen Caleb have the most inaccurate throws on are those out routes. Vertical stem and then turn and break towards the sideline. And sometimes those are from a wide split. Sometimes those are from, more of a narrow split in the slot and in line. And on those out routes, he almost exclusively misses by overthrowing and throwing it in front of the receiver. It's either too high or too far in front. Rarely on those out breaking routes do you see him underthrow it or put it behind the receiver. And we don't have like a hard and fast, clear reason why, but I can imagine when you're trying to push those throws to the sidelines, towards the sidelines on outbreaking routes, and it doesn't discriminate between left or right. It's happened on both sides of the field. I have to imagine my theory, my hypothesis there is that he's trying to fire those balls in there because there's some extra distance horizontally when you're throwing from the pocket there. Or sometimes you're flushed out of the pocket and you're trying to fire the ball downfield, and that he puts a little bit too much on it. Either leads him a little bit too much in front or puts a little bit too much air underneath it and it goes too high or too far in front. But I think there's a reason why it's not a wider variety of misses, but he's missing in a lot of the same ways there. And I think he's pushing it a little bit too much on some of those out breaking routes. Same thing is true on the go routes, just the straight vertical 9 routes. I think every single one he's missed this season has been charted as an overthrow. There might have been one that wasn't an overthrow, but at least all the inaccurate ones were overthrows. He's pushing the ball downfield. He's trying to sort of put a lot behind it and get it down there and kind of put it out in front for receivers to go get. I think you're seeing the same thing on some of the out routes. And that's where he's putting too much on it. And it just has to sort of dial that back in. But those two, like, you'd rather you overthrow it and go safely and complete than underthrow it and give the cornerback a shot at potentially intercepting it. Whereas I think you see the opposite on crossing routes. That's another area where Caleb has missed. I think that was the second most missed route. And we're going to distinguish crossing routes here from in routes or dig routes. So like an in or a dig would be like a 90-degree turn, right? Where you go straight vertical and then you turn left or right. You turn in at a 90-degree and go straight horizontal. Whereas a crossing route, by this definition, is more of a diagonal or like a drag or a diagonal type of route, like where there's no vertical stem first. You're either heading straight horizontal or you're kind of going diagonal across the middle of the field. But any of those kind of like curved routes that break inward, when you look at Caleb's misses on those are often behind the receiver or underthrown. He's not overthrowing or leading in too much in front on the crossing routes. Those tend to have not enough on them, but the out routes and the go routes tend to have too much on them. And again, like, we don't know exactly why, but like you try to put like a hypothesis or a theory. I think those guys are, because on those crossing routes, in order for it to qualify as a crossing route, essentially you're starting on one end of the field and crossing the middle of the field and then getting to the other side of the field. And so I think as they're sort of working their way across the middle, they're breaking away from Caleb a little bit. I think he's had trouble kind of calibrating, the exact distance there to like lead them without trying to lead them too much, right? Like I think it's sort of an overcorrection from the out routes, because the out routes are again like that 90-degree turn, right? Vertical turn, break to the outside, and like he's trying to time that with the break to the outside and fire that pass in there. The crossing route it's not slower in terms of like the route, right? But like there's no break. It's just developing the whole way across the field. So I think like he's seeing it the whole time and doesn't have to like fire it in there with a precision timing. And so then he maybe doesn't fire it in there enough and it falls a little bit short or ends up a little bit behind the receiver. And so I think that's where you're sort of seeing these different accuracy issues and challenges with Caleb Williams at times. And those are sort of the trends that have stood out to me through the first 12 weeks of the season. I think the good news is that those are very fixable and identifiable, right? He's not spraying all over the map and it's like, oh, geez, he's missing high, low, left, and right on these plays. It's like, no, he seems to be having the same couple issues isolated to the same couple of situations. So we'll take a look at like what kind of things they can do to fix that. And then like, I want to talk bigger picture about what amount of inaccuracy and missed throws is acceptable, is okay. Like every quarterback misses some throws. No one is perfect. No one's finished the game with a perfect completion percentage of like any sort of significant number of pass attempts in football. You're going to miss some throws. So how many misses is allowable and how many misses is too many? We'll explore some of these different dynamics, and maybe there's not always concrete answers, but at least kind of get a range of what might work next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel. We're loving the NFL season so far, but the NBA season is back now, and there's no better place to get in on all the basketball action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Because even if you miss the opening tip-off, or you just want to ride that hot hand who's scoring once the game gets rolling, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to the big fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine those in-game and live bets to a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It just keeps every game exciting, game 1 through game 82, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The good news for Caleb Williams is that when you go through his tape and you go through any of his 12 games this season, the problem is rarely, if ever, misreading the coverage. Every once in a blue moon, maybe, I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head where he just totally read the play wrong. When he is missing throws, it is purely, almost exclusively inaccuracy. I should say there are also times when maybe he's trying to force in a pass where the defender is tight in coverage, but I don't necessarily assume that is misreading the coverage. I think it's him saying, I think I can squeeze this ball in there and I'm going to fire it in. And so that feels like a much more fixable problem to have. You know, you think about Mitch Trubisky, Bears quarterbacks of the past. Mitch Trubisky had a lot of trouble reading coverages at times. I can remember a few interceptions where he just throws it and a linebacker steps in front of it and just takes off. And you're like, how did he not see that defender? How did he not know that defender was going to get there? It's harder to teach quarterbacks to be masters of reading coverage. Or Justin Fields so often would be hesitant to pull the trigger on a pass even when someone's open, or he would be late to pull the trigger on a pass when someone's open, and by the time he throws it, the defender has a chance to recover and can step in front of it and make the catch, make the interception. And it's not like he misread the coverage, it's just like the timing and the confidence and the decisiveness wasn't there. Caleb isn't really having those issues. It's much more like footwork, mechanics, delivery type of stuff, plus some miscommunications and stuff here and there, but mostly stuff where like you can just keep working on it with time on task, working with the receivers, and especially in the offseason, just kind of fine-tuning mechanics. You may recall the Bears switched his drop back this year to be left foot forward versus right foot forward. So like some of this is still new for him, and that all feels like stuff that you might not fix in season on the fly because you're pretty busy like game planning for opponents and working on specific plays. But like over the course of the offseason, you can see those types of mechanical issues improve a lot more easily. Not a guarantee, but a lot more easily than like the mental between the ears stuff. This feels a lot more physical and stuff with Caleb. And so I think you're going to continue to see some inaccuracies over the course of the rest of the season. And it's a question of like, what is an acceptable amount? There's always going to be some. Every quarterback has some, but there's a number that's too many and there's a number that's okay. And how do you kind of find that number? There's a couple different perspectives I want to turn to here. One, first of all, if you take all of Caleb Williams' incomplete passes this season, you could sort them into a few categories. You can look at how many of those were him being inaccurate, how many of those were caused by the opposing pass rush, right? A batted pass or a throwaway that forces him to miss, forces him to be incomplete. How many of those are passes that are broken up by coverage? How many of those are receivers having errors, dropping passes, not getting their feet in bounds, falling down on a route or stopping the route? And how much is purely miscommunication where quarterback and receiver are not on the same page? He throws one spot, receiver goes another spot. And for Caleb Williams, out of all of his incompletions, not out of all of his pass attempts, but specifically out of all of his incompletions, about 40% of his incompletions have been inaccurate throws. 38.8% of his total incomplete passes have been inaccurate. That's the largest category of his incomplete passes, according to True Media. About 23% have been those batted passes and throwaways that have been forced by pressure from the opposing defense. About 18% of those have been pass breakups, batted passes, passes broken up by cornerbacks, like things where the coverage forces the incompletion rather than the pass being inaccurate. And then about 16% are on the receivers, and about 4% are miscommunications between quarterback and receiver. The miscommunications have definitely come down since the first few weeks of the season. But I look at these rates right here, and you can automatically right away see where this can improve even in season. That if you can take that 16% of the passes that are receiver errors and drop those down by reducing drop passes, guys holding on to the passes, Rome Odunze getting his feet in bounds on the sidelines, or like there was a play against the Steelers when he tried to throw a screen pass quick to DJ Moore, he just fell down. DJ Moore tripped and fell and didn't catch the pass. It wasn't because it was a bad throw by Caleb Williams, but it's like receiver error type stuff feels like it can and should and will get better. Not instantly, but you would hope as the season goes on, those things keep improving and you can bring down his incompletions for fewer receiver errors. The miscommunications are already on the way down. And even like the pressure force type of plays, like the better pass protection you get, the fewer throwaways there will be. And the pass protection has been pretty good. I'm not sure that number is going to come down a ton. A lot of those throwaways happen late in plays after he's already left the pocket and it's 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds in a play where you're not expecting your offensive line to grow. But we're hovering around that like 38, 39, 40% inaccuracy rate. And that's on his incomplete passes, not of all of his pass attempts, but 40% of his misses, of his incomplete passes are in that category of like missing based on inaccuracy. That feels like too much. That feels like more than we should hope for Caleb Williams. And I think this is an exercise in like expectations, right? Like I think that 40% number is fine for a starting caliber NFL quarterback. Like I don't think Caleb Williams is like some crazy inaccurate quarterback that's way more inaccurate than anybody else. The question is, what should he be? He's the number 1 overall pick 2 years ago. He's being coached by Ben Johnson that's scheming open receivers. He has plenty of receiver talent. He has an offensive line that's playing better. Like I think we can and should expect and hope for better accuracy from Caleb Williams. But then like, well, what's the number then, right? How many missed throws is he allowed per game? If he misses 7 or 8 against the Steelers, like what's the number there? And Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner weighed in on this conversation, not necessarily specifically about Caleb Williams, actually. He was talking about a different quarterback, but talked about this idea on Twitter. And I wanted to reference a tweet he threw up. And I'm not here to say that Caleb Williams or that Kurt Warner is the end-all be-all authority on this. And he's not here to say that either, but I just think a Hall of Famer perspective is a good one to include, even if we don't have to take it as gospel here. But he talked about how he, on an average of like, if a quarterback is throwing 33 attempts in a game, he thinks a great game is missing 6 or less, a really good game is missing 10 or less, and a good game is 13 or less. And so this as a rate, right, like 6 out of 33 passes, I'm no math major, but I can type it into Google, that's about 18% of his passes being missed. 10 out of 33 would be about, what would that be, like a third? Essentially a little less than a third, 30% of his passes, and then 13 or less would be, I don't know what that, math is hard for me, maybe 2/5, 40% of his passes or so missed. Like those are a little generous for my taste. Again, like Kurt Warner's the Hall of Famer, so I'm not here to say he's wrong or that he knows better than me, but like I think it kind of gives us a little bit of like if 13% is kind of like a good threshold there of like out of your pass attempts, missing on about 13% of them. And that's not even necessarily like a 13% completion percentage, but I'm talking about like missed throws, not including drops, right? Not including throwaways, not including spikes, but just like throws that you miss, about 13% of them. Well, okay, then like if we use the Steelers game on Sunday as an example, Caleb Williams attempted 35 passes in that game. He'd be allowed to miss 6 or 7, and that's about what he missed from an accuracy standpoint. So like I don't think he's that far off from Kurt Warner's threshold there. I would prefer a slightly tighter threshold. I want to hold Caleb Williams to a slightly higher standard than that. Like those thresholds are probably fine for a average starting caliber quarterback. You know, those thresholds are fine for, I don't know if I want to throw any quarterbacks onto the bus. Like those thresholds are fine for Daniel Jones and Tua Tagovailoa and Sam Darnold and, you know, maybe even, I don't want to say the Jared Goffs of the world, right? But like there's a tier of quarterback where those thresholds are fine. I want Caleb Williams. We should all want Caleb Williams to be closer to that Josh Allen, Joe Burrow category of quarterbacks. Not that he has to be that or it's a failure, right? But like we want to aim higher with Caleb and hold him to a higher expectations and hope that he can be maybe not tier 1 quarterback, but right there in that next tier. Whoever you put after Mahomes, Burrow, and Allen, like he should be in that next conversation with Stafford and Baker Mayfield and, you know, maybe, you know, Jalen Hurts and whoever else you want to throw in that next threshold. Like that's the standard I want to hold Caleb Williams to being. And to me, that's like slightly fewer incomplete throws and inaccurate throws than we're seeing so far. We'll keep close tabs on Caleb Williams' accuracy all season long right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Make sure you're coming back tomorrow and make us your first listen once again, because we're going to have Crossover Thursday with Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles for your Thanksgiving listening pleasure, breaking down everything we need to know about the Philadelphia Eagles in this upcoming matchup. We'll look at the biggest matchups, top storylines, keys to victory for both teams. And then before you know it, it'll be game day on Friday. We'll break it all down for you with a live stream afterwards, and then the Locked On Bears podcast coming out for you on Monday. So keep tuning into Locked On Bears in the meantime. And I hope that every time you give the podcast a listen or watch along on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, it just makes it a little bit easier for you to bear down.